a difficult situation. Now, it's funny that I think you guys are bringing up the Eagles. One of the things I actually think going into this season, I don't think the Eagles are going to win the NFC East, excuse me. I don't think the Eagles are the big – I think Dallas wins the NFC East. I think the drafting of Mozzie Smith, getting size to their defensive line, something they didn't have before, getting a true number 2 receiver and a deep threat in Brandon Cooks, who's a terrific player, and then getting Stephon Gilmore. I think those 3 things, along with keeping Dan Quinn, I think Dallas quietly, along with their offensive line, Tyler Smith's going to have a second year. I think Dallas is going to be the better team in the NFC East. I like Washington. If you can promise me that Sam Howell will be half decent, heck, if you could throw Jimmy Garoppolo on Washington right now, I might pick Washington to make the playoffs. I really like that defensive line. I think their defense is very good. I don't know in how many years it's been since a team has won the NFC East back-to-back, right? Dallas won it the year before. Philadelphia, I think, won it the year before that. There's a couple of Giants years in between. Every year there's a different team winning the NFC East. I think Philly falls off this year. I think Dallas is the team to look out for or in the NFC East, but I don't think the biggest contender for the Niners is in the NFC East, by the way. I think this entire thing of losing both coordinators, having all these different Georgia players with kind of shaky stuff happening surrounding them at the University of Georgia, all of this moving parts. I'm not fully there with Jalen Hurts. I saw it. It was great. I'm still not 100% there. I will continue to be just a hair bit of a skeptic. I'm getting less and less bullish. And by the way, before you come on to me, go look at this. I don't get a lot of predictions right, but I said the Philadelphia Eagles last year would be the number 2 seed when nobody thought that they were even a contender in the NFC. Before the season, I said they would be the number 2 seed. So I saw it coming before the year. Last year, and this year I might, see it coming wrong, but I think I don't like it. Lane Johnson coming back on this 1 year, I don't like it. It doesn't spell good to me.
I personally, I think Philly, I mean, roster wise, they're there. They definitely are there. It's hard when you're the hunted, things do change. I think it's totally fair to not be as bullish on Hurts just because I don't know. Over the last few years with quarterbacks, I've really tried to take this 3-year approach. Give me 3 years. Give me 3 years. And that's more like playing 3 years, not just in the league 3 years. There's so much that can happen up, down. Things change so quickly. The league catches up. The league slows down, whatever. I think I need to see. I don't think he's going to have a dramatic fall off, but I could see a fall off for sure. I wouldn't be that shocked. So I like your reasoning. You do think Philadelphia, I would assume, is still probably a playoff team, though, in the NFC. So the question
roster-wise, I have no questions.
Yeah.
I think they're still top to bottom the most talented roster. I just don't think the roster fits together as a team as seamlessly as it did. I think there were way too moving parts for them last offseason. By the way, the last thing I forgot to mention, this new zone read rule is going to fuck with their offense. It's going to fuck with their offense. This new zone read rule where you can't do the forward handoffs anymore. Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is going to fuck with their offense, right? Last year, their entire offense was – look, Jalen Hurts played awesome last year. But for me, it's hard to fully rally behind a quarterback when 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7 turns into a rundown because 4th and 3, they just shove the quarterback 8 yards and, it was the stupidest play in football. So it's like how many plays is he really being asked to make? He was a top 10 quarterback. I'm not trying to diminish that. He's an excellent football player, but the margins of, hey, can you carry the team when everything is not working in rhythm and in timing the way it was last year? That's a question I still have, and I think too much went right for Philadelphia last year. By the way, their interior defensive line, they lost Javon Hargrave, and they drafted Jalen Carter. Great. But they had an in-between period last year where Jordan Davis got hurt, and they had to go sign Linval Joseph and Dominic, as Cam Newton calls him, Donkey Kong Sue, off the streets. They had to go sign both of them to come and alleviate issues on their defense. Both of those guys are not available to be signed this offseason. Jordan Davis, when he came back from injury in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl, was terrible. I'm not as bullish on that entire thing.
I do want to say this, though, and you talked about their coordinators. Obviously, I think the world of Steichen. I think he's a hell of a quarterback whisperer, and I think the Richardson pairing at the Colts, we talked about it well before the draft and how I thought Richardson with Steichen was the recipe for success. I really believe that. They're definitely missing something there. But as far as Gannon goes and that defensive coordinator, that is addition by subtraction. That was the one thing that I said about Philly going into that, and I talked about it with the Philly content creator. I said, your defense is so stacked player to player. The only thing holding them back is your defensive coordinator. I thought he was god awful. I think he got exposed in the Super Bowl because of it. I don't know how he got a head coaching job, but I do not like what they had there. Anything other than him is going to make that defense better. And there are still players up and down that defense. They are extremely talented. If they can get somebody that can at least put it together schematically, they're going to be better defensively, even if they take a step back offensively. So I'm curious to see how that whole thing plays out.
One last thing before I go to you, Krug. One last personnel thing that people underrated. Last year, the most underrated thing about the Philadelphia Eagles was how good their linebackers played. TJ Edwards and Kazir White played very well last year. Nakobe Dean with knee problems is going to start, and then who do they have? What? Nicholas Morrow? Sean Bradley? Who's going to start next to him? Their linebackers, Kazir White signed for pretty decent money. TJ Edwards signed for pretty decent money. Both those guys heavily underrated on how well they played last year. They played very well. I think they had a couple of pretty bad games in between when Philadelphia struggled to stop the run. And they were definitely aided by having, Captain America and the Avengers as their defensive line. But I think the fact that they lost those linebacker personnel to keep the corner and all, I'm skeptical. Go ahead, Krug. My bad.
Well, I mean, if you're following Philly, supposedly the guy in their camp that's had a great offseason is Christian Ellis, number 53, who's in their linebacker mix, and Ellis is an interesting player. I think that's Luther Ellis's brother. He played at Idaho.
Yeah.
He's a pretty good player. I think you're way, way, way overrating Mozzie Smith.
Okay.
Mozzie Smith was on the Bruce Feldman freaks list, and everybody got excited about his physical potential, including Dallas. But he's got short arms. He makes no plays behind the line of scrimmage. The guy had 7 games last year where he had 3 tackles or less. He had 1 sack all last year. In the NFL, you're going to get more zone blocking scheme. Go flip on that film, Iowa against Michigan, and Iowa zone scheme. He couldn't do anything. He was a total non-factor in that game.
I did watch that game.
He's a little bit like a Dontari Poe.
Yes.
He's all show and no go. I don't see this guy. To me, DJ Jones is worlds better than Mozzie Smith, but everybody loves Mozzie because Feldman put him number 1 on the freaks list, and he is a freak. He's incredible strength, but I just don't see it. I mean, I think Dallas, and not only that, I think he's a 2-down guy. I think he's a 2-down run stuffer who's not going to give you much on 3rd down. I know there's been a lot of talk in Dallas about Mozzie. I don't buy it. I really don't. I think he'll help, but this idea that he's like Chris Jones, no, he's not. So I still think Philly's the best team in the conference. I like Philly. I just think Philly, when you look at, Jalen Carter doesn't have to do too much. I really believe Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox are going to get him to fly right. They got a lot of talent up front. Milton Williams, Jordan Davis is going to be better this year.
Better hope Lane Johnson doesn't get hurt, man.
They got a Jomo from Texas.
Doesn't get hurt.
They got Contavious Street. I mean, they've added some bodies. They got they're terrific on the line of scrimmage. And then in the secondary, they added Terrell Edmonds, but then they also drafted what I thought was the best safety in Sidney Brown. I think
an awesome player. Yes.
I think Philly's got, they lost Miles Sanders, and I think that's a major loss. And we'll see. But one of these years,
Penny or DeAndre Swift.
I'm not a Rashad Penny guy, and I'm not a DeAndre Swift guy. I know they wanted Swift because Swift's a Philly guy, but Swift has been, very inconsistent throughout his career. To me, the best back they have is Gainwell by far. So I don't know, but I still like Philly just because Philly's got Goddard, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and obviously Hurts, 2 really, really strong offensive linemen. Guys are going to be in Canton and Kelsey and Lane Johnson. But I mean, I think Philly might come back to the pack as far as injuries, but they're still the class of that division, in my opinion.
Jesse?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, you look at the secondary depth, you talk about guys like, I mean, it seemed like every single pick they made, you're like, how did you pull that prospect so late? You talked about Ojomo. He could have been a third, fourth round guy, depending on where you were looking. They got him like round 7, super late. Then you had Ringo slipping, fell right to him. I agree with you. Sidney Brown, best safety in the draft. Every single time they picked, I was like, you got to be kidding me. How did they do it? And I feel like the depth in the pieces leaving on the defensive line was so overrated at the beginning of the offseason. Everybody's like, oh, it's a mass exodus. The defensive line's going to be trash. They still have, I believe, 4 guys on that defensive line that have gone over 10 sacks at some point in their career. It's not like Hargrave was a consistent 10-sack guy year in and year out. He did it one time. It was last year. I could see those guys doing it again.
9.5 the year before.
Right. And okay. you know as well as I do, the one guy that I wanted the 49ers to get last offseason that ended up in Philadelphia. And we had a debate back and forth on could he repeat leaving Carolina? That was Hassan Reddick. He absolutely blew up last year. He's in the perfect defensive scheme for him with the weapons around him to just let him go out and make plays. I think he's going to continue to do so.
And he's a little undersized, but they have Nolan Smith now.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
And also Teron Jackson, my buddy, Rick Mueller, Randy Mueller's brother, is the recruiting coordinator at Coastal, and he recruited Teron Jackson, and Jackson's the real deal. And he has, he's going to come of age this year. I mean, he's now at that spot where he's ready to take off. So I think Philly's line's pretty good.
In the Super Bowl hangover, guys, like the Super Bowl hangover, we're going to pretend like we're just not going to believe in that one anymore.
I believe it's something. I believe it's something because you're playing, not because of the Super Bowl, but just because you're playing longer. And, to me, it's really Philly's season comes down to the same thing I think the Niners season could come down to. A couple of key offensive linemen must stay healthy. If you lose Trent Williams, you're cooked. If you lose Lane Johnson, you're cooked. I mean, that is as strong as these teams are. I think they're one inopportune injury away from just being down with everybody else. But I do think Philly's still going to be there.
I think Philly's going to see a lot of different looks this year. I'm interested to see how their offense evolves. But typically when we see coordinator changes go through like this, while we do see ownership from the offense of the new guy, they're trying to recreate what they did the year before often. And usually it doesn't have the same results. I think we'll see different looks, too, on how people defend that RPO game. Like I said, I think the zone read, the new rule is going to fuck with how they do the zone read, but we'll see. That RPO game that they do, though, where, hey, we're going to have the tight end just motion off and sift, and basically we're just going to have him motion across and go to the flat, and we're going to read the zone read. And if you come to Hurts, he's going to dump it to the tight end, and if you stay with the tight end, Hurts is going to run for 7 yards. I think teams are going to have a better plan on how they handled it because that was a wrinkle they added to just the conventional zone read because they basically turned the zone read into an RPO. We'll see. There's a lot of time to debate this one.
I'll tell you one thing that is going to help them, though. They completely unlocked A.J. Brown. As great as A.J. Brown was and we thought he was coming out of Tennessee, they brought him to a whole new gear, unlocked a whole part of his game that a lot of people probably didn't even know existed or forgot had existed after coming out of college. They unlocked that. And that dude is an absolute cheat code in that offense. That's going to be hard to stop.
Oh, yeah. Dominant player.